Lord.
Order. Good morning, everybody. We are the Subcommittee of International Human Rights of the Standing Committee of Foreign Affairs and International Development. This is the 23rd of October 2012. This is meeting number 52.
So be on your best behavior. Your mother might be watching. We have as our witness today Neil Reeder, who is the Director General of the Latin American and Caribbean Bureau of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Reeder has been with us before and is returning again to update us following the Venezuelan elections. By a curious coincidence, we also are all now in receipt of the government's response to our report, our third report, or more correctly, it's the third report of the Standing Committee, but it originated here, relating to the situation of human rights in Venezuela, and that has been distributed to committee members for your reading pleasure. So the usual rules apply here. As we go through questions, we'll have a 10-minute presentation. We'll look at how much time is available. We'll divide that amount of time by 6, which will allow every member of the committee to ask a question and get a fulsome answer. This is actual. So I should mention, by the way, that just by way of introduction, that Mr. Reeder will be responding to a motion that was passed by the subcommittee. Specifically, the motion was that the subcommittee invite the department to discuss the processes by which the Government of Canada raises the profile and increases the protection of human rights defenders and the effects of these actions, their effectiveness, for example, by awarding the Embassy of Canada in Venezuela a Human Rights Award and similar prizes. So, Mr. Reeder, we look forward to your testimony. Please feel free to begin any time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and je vais faire mes remarques en anglais, mais si...
Make my remarks in English, but if there are questions in the official language of your choice, I'd be very pleased to answer them.
The narrow question initially, because I was asked to come forward in relation to your motion on the human rights defenders and the Canadian support for the human rights NGOs in Venezuela. So I'd like to speak a bit about our efforts to support human rights defenders in that country. We were pleased to receive and respond, as you said, Mr. Chairman, to the subcommittee's detailed report in June of this year, and we're glad to see that the government response was tabled in Parliament this month. Canada continues to voice its concerns regarding the human rights situation in Venezuela. In 2011, Venezuela underwent its first Universal Periodic Review on human rights at the UN Human Rights Council. The Venezuela government seemed to view the process as overly critical of the political reforms of the Chavez government. However, the government of Venezuela did participate in the mechanism and accepted 95 total recommendations. During Canada's statement, we noted Venezuela's progress on social rights, equality, and efforts to reform the police, but expressed concern about impunity, lack of independence of the judiciary, and challenges to freedom of expression and association. Canada also called for the Venezuelan government to publicly recognize the legitimate role of human rights defenders. Canada made 8 total recommendations, of which 2 were accepted. Unfortunately, all recommendations related to the independence of the judiciary, freedom of the press, and the ability of human rights defenders to work freely were rejected. One of Canada's notable successes in Venezuela in the area of human rights is our annual Human Rights Award. Since 2009, Canadian Embassy in Venezuela has partnered with the Universidad Central Center for Peace and Human Rights to create a high-profile award in order to recognize the efforts and careers of prominent human rights defenders in Venezuela. The prize, which is widely publicized, is given out at a large diplomatic event, which is in fact the Embassy's largest public event of the year. It also includes a trip to Canada to meet with civil society academia, and Canadian government officials. The recipient, accompanied by embassy staff, then travels to centres outside the capital of Venezuela to share his or her experiences as a human rights defender. The prize not only gives recognition to the winner, but has also come to symbolize the public commitment of Canada by providing financial and moral support to civil society organizations whose role is increasingly questioned by local authorities. The winner for 2011-2012, Lisandro Raul Cubas, the founding member of a prominent NGO called Provea, held dialogues on various topics in Canada in relation to labour, health, and Indigenous rights. He also made new contacts and informed stakeholders about the situation of human rights in that country. He also learned about Canadian mechanisms for monitoring and enforcing human rights, which he and his colleagues can now apply in Venezuela. A substantial program of some 20 meetings and activities was organized in Ottawa and Montreal, including a meeting with the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Diana Blonsky, to discuss Venezuela's human rights situation. The previous year's winner, Feliciano Reina, was able to learn from the Ontario Human Rights Commission about public consultations and best practices with NGOs in Toronto working for the rights of persons with HIV/AIDS. Mr. Reina has forged an ongoing relationship with the University of Ottawa Human Rights Centre and has since returned to Canada on 2 occasions as a board member of Civicus, a global civil society network. The first winner of the prize, Humberto Prado, who is director of an NGO which monitors the rights of prisoners, was able to meet with Corrections Canada officials and visit a number of Canadian prison and detention centres. He uses these models in his advice and advocacy to Venezuelan officials in order to better design buildings and programs to address the country's prison crisis. All 3 winners also shared their experiences in different regions of Venezuela. They were able to deliver their messages through public dialogues with academics and students, as well as with various civil society representatives, generating debate on a wide variety of human rights issues relevant to each state that was visited. Private meetings were also organized in Venezuela with local ombudsmen and other high-level government contacts. The award also allows the winners and Canada's embassy in Venezuela to engage government interlocutors outside the capital who may not normally participate in such discussions. The prize is well promoted, and 2011's award was supported by press releases and several radio interviews organized by the embassy, 3 of which were primetime national programs, including 2 of the most widely listened to programs in Venezuela. This year's prize competition was launched on September 4th, and the call for nominations ends on October 28th. The winner is intended to be announced in Caracas on December 10th, which is International Human Rights Day. The trips to Canada and around Venezuela will follow in 2013. The announcement and an explanation of the award has been placed on the Government of Canada website through our embassy in Caracas in Spanish, with English and French translations to follow. Through a relatively small investment, Canada is having an important impact. Establishing links with Canadian institutions and Canadian organizations injects new ideas and models into the Venezuelan NGOs and provides new perspectives on the role of civil society and how to interact with government. It also helps to share Venezuelan experiences and perspectives among the Venezuelans themselves. These exchanges build capacity within NGO leaders and leadership. They also reinforce and multiply Canada's commitment to human rights, a value shared by our partners. The award plays a role in depoliticizing the promotion and defense of human rights in an environment where restrictions on civil society are tightening. This effort to create non-political and non-polarized spaces for dialogue on human rights, including outside of the capital, results in our embassy gaining a better understanding of the country's varied human rights issues. More importantly, this provides a unique opportunity to promote a Canadian foreign policy priority in Venezuela in a non-confrontational and less controversial manner. The award continues to be an important tool for Canada, but is not the only way by which our embassy in Caracas achieves its commitments and priorities. In 2011, the Embassy of Canada spent over 50% of its annual Canada Fund for local initiatives on projects supporting human rights, with the remainder divided between community efforts to improve local governance and civil and citizen security. A portion of the Embassy's public diplomacy funds were also allocated to projects supporting human rights. Canada will continue to use these initiatives to encourage the values of human rights, democratic governance, and citizen security. We will also continue to promote human rights in Venezuela by organizing regular meetings with civil society and diplomatic missions and public events to show our support. Following President Chavez's recent re-election, Canada will continue its engagement with Venezuela in an attempt to keep the channels of dialogue open with government officials and seek opportunities to raise issues. That would be the end of my remarks, Mr. Chairman, and merci de votre invitation d'aujourd'hui.
Thank you. Well, you've been very timely. We have 45 minutes, so we'll have time then for, well, I'm going to say 6-minute question and answer periods, because I do want to leave a few minutes at the end to deal with some administrative matters. So we begin with the government side. Mr. Albrecht, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Reader, for being here today. I was not part of the subcommittee that presented the report, but I have had a chance to look at the government response to the report and also listening to your comments today. I want to focus on the recommendations that deal with the financial and moral support, recommendations 4 and 12 in the report. They're bunched together in the responses of the government. And first of all, I certainly applaud the work that's going on there. You did mention in your opening remarks as well the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives. And you indicated that half of that had been spent for public diplomacy allocations on projects supporting human rights. Could you give us an idea as to what is the size of that fund? And then if you have that at your fingertips, and if not, you can get it to us later. And then you mentioned some of the other projects that were supported through that.
I would want to get back to you, sir, on the exact size of the fund, but generally speaking, funds of that nature at our missions are usually between $50,000 and $150,000, something like that. I have a list here of some of the Canada Fund projects. I can highlight a couple of them if you like.
Sure, if you would, that would be helpful.
These are in Spanish, so just bear with me. For example, with a group called Uni Andes, promotion of women's human rights, support for women dealing with issues affecting violence against women in Venezuela. Another entity called the House of the Woman, Juana Ramirez, promotion of human rights for women, assisting them to develop a network of community organizations dealing with cases of violence against women at home. Another one is in relation to supporting groups that promote sexual diversity in Venezuela. We're also looking at another one that talks about a book that describes the stories of women who are affected by violations of their human rights in Venezuela, and investigations and displays of art and such over cases of impunity where journalists in Venezuela suffered violence against them and no action was taken, or there was impunity in that particular case. So those are the kinds of programs that we have.
One of the topics that I think this committee is always concerned about is what is the best method that we as a committee and then the Government of Canada can be effective in promoting human rights around the world, but specifically in countries that different cultural sensitivities might come to the front. Are there specific differences that our government takes different approaches on with Venezuela as opposed to other countries? Are there unique methodologies that would apply in Venezuela that may not be applicable worldwide?
Well, I guess the context is difficult in Venezuela because the government challenges the legitimacy of these NGOs, many of them. And NGOs are sort of forced to take sides, or they feel they're being pressured by the government not to do certain things. They're trying to retain their autonomy and independence. So it's a very polarized political environment, and the civil society groups sometimes find themselves in the middle. So they have to kind of navigate carefully if they want to affect change. It means sometimes working with government. Some NGOs won't work with the government, some will. So it's a complicated environment for them to work in. We engage directly with civil society, as do other embassies, friendly embassies in Venezuela. But our leverage on the government to affect change or to encourage them to engage with civil society is rather limited because we don't engage with that government at a very high level, and that's a decision taken by the government of Venezuela, not certainly on our side.
Okay. The one point that came through in some of the reports as well is that some of the anti-Semitic activity that has occurred in the past. Are you aware of any more recent examples where anti-Semitic activity has been occurring and criminal actions against Jewish people, synagogues, and that sort of thing?
Well, as you'll be aware, sir, there were some incidences in the past, and I'm thinking the last one that I'm aware of was more a posting on the government website of language which we felt was offensive to those of the Jewish faith in Venezuela. I was actually in Caracas at that time and raised this with the Foreign Ministry, and subsequent to that, the language was taken off. So we tend to monitor these statements and respond accordingly, but I can't say overt aggression or activities. I haven't heard much lately. And to be fair, we've also seen some effort by President Chavez to reach out to the Jewish community in Venezuela following some of those activities and because of expressions of concern by Canada and others. We also, of course, have an important role because we act as the representative for Israel in Venezuela, given that Venezuela does not have diplomatic relations with Israel, and we process Israeli visas and passports through our embassy.
And I think I still have some time, or am I through?
30 seconds.
Okay, I just wanted to comment that for me as a new person on this committee, it was very encouraging to see the kind of progress that has been made, to see that there was actually a response on the part of the Venezuelan government to take down that website or that material on the website. And while there's still a long way to go, I think Canadians in general should be pretty pleased that we have made progress and that we're going to continue to keep our voice at the table to effect more change. So thank you for your comments today.
Thank you, Mr. Albrecht. Mr. Marsden, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome again. It's good to have you back. Couple of things. One that comes to mind, just as you were talking about the pairing of embassies, because there's been some reaction in Canada about the pairing with the British embassies. Some questions were raised. Are we paired with Israel in other communities, other countries, rather?
I'd have to take that question under advisement, sir,
Okay.
because I don't really know.
It's more of a curiosity than anything else. It's not. It just struck me that this is the first time I've heard of that particular pairing, and
Will come back to us and just send us a piece
Just
of
send us a note.
Yeah,
note
we
back?
will get back to you. But
Yeah.
what I know is we represent Israel's consular interests in Venezuela in accordance with the Vienna Convention.
Sure.
Because of the lack of relations. But I can't speak beyond my particular region. I'd want to check on that. We'll get back to you.
Well, I have no issue with it. It was just a matter of
Yeah.
curiosity. The other thing that struck me is the Human Rights Award that we give out there, and we had witness testimony before about it here and kind of explained it to us. Do we give that award out to any other countries? I mean, the human rights issues in Colombia or Honduras are fairly significant. Have we done the same thing there, or is this something just exclusive to Venezuela?
I would want to probably check on that, sir. I couldn't speak for other regions. Although I do, let's say that certainly I can speak in terms of Latin America and the Caribbean, that we have a lot of programming of that nature in a number of countries, as you mentioned, where there may be human rights challenges. But in terms of an individual award, I'm not sure beyond our region if we actually do that, but we can check.
Well, again, it was just why, I guess the next question was why we kind of got to the stage of doing that principally in Venezuela. I mean, I understand that there's some risks, and that was going to be my next question, to the human rights defenders in Venezuela. What type of risks do they actually physically face?
Well, I think, I mean, there may be some evidence of physical risk, but I think it's just a non-welcoming environment for them to work in, and that's the challenge that they face. That, you know, you can identify some countries where human rights advocates are aggressed physically or may suffer worse fate than that. I would say more in Venezuela, it's just not a welcoming environment, and oftentimes the NGOs find themselves, you know, attacked by the government, and even among the NGO community itself, the debate about whether you should work with government or not and such. So it's a difficult environment to work in and not a very welcoming one. So Canada's view is that we should step up and try to assist, because these are fundamental values no matter what the nature of the government.
Well, I don't think any of us would disagree with you on that final point. Again, coming back to Colombia and Honduras, and there's some other places where there's significant issues around human rights violations, very serious one in North Korea or wherever you might want to look. Yeah. It just struck me as that this intervention was kind of original in how it was put together. Sounds like it's a good idea. I don't have any issues with it. It was just how it evolved and how it got to that point. You used the term earlier in your remarks about friendly embassies. We're used to terminology, excuse me, where we talk about our allied nations and our friends and that. Is there a distinction between that and what you'd consider a friendly embassy? And for instance, perhaps a place that we don't have the best relations with country to country, but that you may be able to have a working relationship with an embassy?
Well, I think in the case of Venezuela, a number of what we would call our traditional friends all have similar problems of access, of doing their normal diplomatic work. United States, for example, chargé-level representation in Caracas. United Kingdom, some of the other countries that we work well with, all find it a difficult and challenging environment. So we tend to work together for common objectives, and certainly in terms of information sharing and such, because there's sort of different tiers of countries that have access to that government based on their orientation, ideology. And Canada certainly is not part of the inner circle. We take strong positions. We defend Canadian values. We support the human rights defenders, and as such, it creates a significant gap with the host government. That being said, we do have other interests in Venezuela. I was looking at the numbers of our trade figures. It's a very important export market for Western Canadian agricultural products. It's RIM's biggest market in South America. It's a very prosperous country that buys 90% of its goods, and 90% of its revenue comes from oil. So there's a commercial relationship that's important, but we find at the political, civil society level, that's where things get complicated.
How's my time, Mr. Chair?
Your time is almost, you got 30 seconds for a quick one.
Well, your comment about the economy and how we have a good exchange with them, would that suggest that some of the aspects of this government have actually been productive for the citizens of Venezuela in the sense of some of their policies?
Well, as I said in my remarks, sir, I mean, you could look at some indicators in Venezuela and you look at them in a positive light because of the reductions in the level of poverty, increased availability of housing. Again, a country with severe inequities in income. Some of that has been diminished. But at the same time, on the human rights side, we see a tightening of space. We see domination, for example, by the president of his media outlets during the election. It wasn't a level playing field. So we do recognize some gains have been made, but one would expect some gains to be made given $60 billion in oil revenues annually, you should be able to develop better housing and such for people. But sadly, there are still many issues. Security is a major concern. Crime. It's one of the highest murder rates per capita in the world. So there's many challenges ahead. But one has to recognize there has been some advances. And that's not unique to Venezuela. I mean, Brazil has had 30 million people out of extreme poverty in the last 2 terms of President Lula. So we're seeing a trend, Colombia as well, a lifting up of the poorest of the poor, which is a very good thing. In Venezuela, that lifting up is driven purely by oil revenues.
Thank you.
Thank you. We turn now to Ms. Graywall, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for your time. Well, in your opinion, were the 7 October 2012 presidential elections, were they free and fair in Venezuela?
Well, Madame, you can say, yes, the election outcome, the election took place in a transparent fashion. Our view is that the means by which they undertake elections in Venezuela is fair. They have a professional system of voting, electronic system of voting. Our view is that the process itself, the actual vote, was fair. The challengers did not challenge the outcome of the vote, and Mr. Capriles was quite clear. He said, I accept the vote, democracy has spoken, and we'll move on. 88% participation rate, huge rates of participation. But the playing field cannot be considered fair when the President monopolizes the airwaves, when the President can take over at will the television stations to promote his message, when you get massive coverage of the President, almost no profile or opportunity for the opposition to use electronic media, for example. And then this whole question of using state resources, for housing programs, all this kicked in before the election. So obviously there's people trying to influence the voter. So the environment wasn't a fair playing field, but the electoral process we believe to have been fair, and most observers would say that, even the opposition candidate and the members of the Electoral Council. Even the opposition member who was on the Electoral Council said, well, if you're talking about fraud, give me some examples, because I don't see them. So there was issues on voting day about people distributing pamphlets outside polling booths and that sort of thing, which isn't supposed to be done. But generally speaking, the process itself was fair. Was the environment in which the election took place fair? That's a different question.
Have you heard about any incidents of violence or intimidation against political opponents or against President Chivas since the election?
No, since the election, no, I can't say I have. There was some reports of violence against the opposition, some workers in the opposition party. A couple of them were killed like a week or two before the vote, but not since. I'm not aware of anything.
Has Canada received any further reports on anti-Semitic attacks in Venezuela? If so, how has the government of Canada responded?
Yeah, Madam, I think we had that question just a little while ago, and actually we've not heard anything lately. I would have to go back a number of months when we talked about this other issue, but I've not seen anything lately.
Recently, Venezuela formally notified the Secretary General of the Organization of American States that it intended to denounce the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights effective next September. So can you comment on the Venezuelan intentions in regards to this decision, and is this cause for concern for the plurality of the government given the increase in threats of violence by pro-government officials?
Well, we would certainly regret that announcement, Madame, and it's part of a larger pattern that we see of Venezuela essentially. It's not supportive of the Organization of American States. It doesn't accept that regional human rights organizations, commissions have a legitimate role. It challenges that role, which it sees as intrusive. It sees the OAS and its organizations as instruments of what they call the imperial power, which would be the United States. So they tend not to be supportive of those kinds of institutions anyway, and this is part of a pattern that we see, including in the OAS, where the ALBA countries, which are the allies of Venezuela, tend to work against Canada and others and tend to work against the larger interests of the Organization of American States, and their ALBA grouping is very much the focus of their interest, and it's kind of a vehicle by which they promote their agenda, which is often against the agenda of Canada, because we see these organizations as inclusive. They represent all of the Americas. For Canada, the OAS is the only organization that brings in everybody from Chile to Canada and into the Caribbean, so we want to be supportive of these hemispheric organizations, but we don't see the same from Venezuela.
Given the current form of Bolivarian or social democracy in Venezuela, the majority can occupy power to the point of shutting out opposition and diversity. So this diminishes the plurality of parties and opinions and members in the government. So due to the dominating nature of this system, how are minorities being effectively represented in the Venezuelan government? So this includes women, opposition parties, and religious minorities.
I'm probably not close enough to the situation to really fully answer that question, if it's a question I can take under advisement. But certainly, I mean, there were a range of candidates in the election. I can't speak to the percentages of women, for example, in the Congress and such. But I don't think that Venezuela would be much different than some of the other Latin American countries in terms of percentages, but I'd rather take that one under review.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Graywall. That's phenomenally well timed. You're exactly on the nose. Professor Kotler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being with us, Mr. Reader. My question has to do with our subcommittee's recommendation number 15, where we called on the Government of Canada to itself call for the immediate release of Judge Maria Lourdes Afiuni and the guarantee of her security and that of her supporters. Now, the government's response is that it would continue to demonstrate support for her cause. Since we made that recommendation, members of the Venezuelan judiciary have publicly admitted to government interference in judicial decision-making. There are a number of examples. I'll give you one. Former Justice Eladio Aponte has confessed to manipulating the criminal justice system in order to persecute opponents of Hugo Chavez. And so my questions to you is whether you can provide us with an update, in particular on the situation of Judge Afiuni. And is she under house arrest? What is the state of her health and well-being? Has she been subject to further threats, intimidation, or harassment? And similarly, have her lawyers and human rights defenders been subject? And has the Government of Canada communicated concern regarding her situation to the Government of Venezuela? And if so, how was this done?
Well, thank you, sir. I can, as of today, what I can advise you is that she remains under house arrest, and it was reported on September 21st that she had been denied the right to vote in the presidential election. And the hearings that took place on her case prior to the election, the judge had deferred a discussion to a later date on her status. Presumably, we interpret that to take place after the elections. But I would like to provide a further update on this, if I can, back to the committee, including the démarches that we may have undertaken. We'll obviously continue to demonstrate our support for the defenders in Venezuela and individuals such as Judge Afiuni, as we indicated to you in our report.
Let me just broaden the question, if I may, to your appreciation of the state of the movement for judicial independence in Venezuela. Are there actions that Canada can take to support these movements? I mean, these movements can have powerful impacts. For example, in Pakistan, we had, the lawyers' movement there, which had the effect of even removing the military dictatorship. So the movement for judicial independence and those associated with it can have a real impact as a whole. So I'm wondering what you can tell us about the current state of judicial independence and any movements on its behalf in Venezuela.
Well, sir, we continue to be preoccupied about the question of the autonomy of the judiciary, and our ambassador has been very engaged on these files in his conversations. I think we've expressed our views in various ways, including through support to civil society, but also to the legal community in that country. Perhaps I can come back and give you a more formal answer on that one.
Thank you. I might just ask, because I know time is just one short question, and your view of Venezuela's decision to effectively withdraw, if not denounce, the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. What impact might this have on the protection of human rights defenders, for example, in Venezuela, and on whether it might influence other states to withdraw from the convention as well?
Well, I think it's very regrettable because, in fact, it cancels off another avenue where one can raise concerns about individual cases in Venezuela. So this is obviously a development of concern. I won't say we were surprised by it, given some of the tenor of the remarks from Venezuela. And in terms of your final point, I guess one could contemplate other members of the ALBA grouping taking a similar approach down the road. But for us, it's not at all a positive development. But as I said previously, I think it also reinforces this point of Venezuela and its allies trying to denigrate or isolate the larger regional institutions that promote and support human rights, because that's not part of their agenda.
Could that affect the mandate, for example, of the rapporteur, the Inter-American Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders?
It could, sir, yeah.
Thanks.
What time, Professor Cutler, if you need it?
Sorry?
You still have another minute if you need it.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, all right. In that case, Mr. Sweet, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Mr. Reader. It's good to see you again. Thank you very much for your testimony. I wanted to refer to recommendation number 10, that the subcommittee recommends that the Government of Canada call upon the Government of Venezuela to take concrete steps to reduce the circulation and number of arms in the hands of its civilian population. And it goes on, but the response from the government is that the government continues to offer expertise to Venezuela regarding policing issues. Has the Venezuelan government taken up the Government of Canada in this regard and accepted some help regarding policing issues, any kind of training or any kind of resources?
My understanding is that we've had some limited cooperation with the government on police reform, professionalization of the police forces, so it's starting. I think we could do more, and we're conscious that this may be an area where we can actually work with that government, because the challenge is one that affects all of the community in terms of the very, very high levels of violence. So I would say that we started, but we could probably do more, and it's an area where we might be able to find some common ground, because the levels of violence are such that they're affecting everyone regardless of their political orientation. It's very troubling to see the rates of crime, kidnapping, express kidnapping, murder per capita rates are among the highest in the world, so it's very troubling. We don't believe that the government has really addressed this issue as seriously as it should, and it's beginning to spiral, and that's, I think, affecting not only security but also public attitudes. And that it was interesting to watch in the election campaign how many people identified insecurity as their principal concern.
And that might be consequential to the significant difference in the vote now, with the spread being drastically diminished. Hugo Chavez mentioned that himself publicly, that he was cognizant of the fact that his plurality had diminished quite a bit. Would I be overstating it to say that the social services that are available to people, the social outcomes that the general population of Venezuela is able to experience now is better, but the human rights aspects around the judiciary that my colleague Mr. Kotler already mentioned around the police and the corruption thereof, and really around the media, as you mentioned, in regards to the election, that's still there and really hasn't diminished at all?
That's probably a fair statement. I would say we recognize the improvement in some of these social indicators. That's a good thing. It's also something as a trend we're seeing across South America. And one would expect those social indicators to be better in the country given the revenues they've got. You know, with the third largest proven reserves of oil in the world, there has to be benefit back to the people. But at the same time, like you said, sir, the environment in which people live, I think, is degrading in terms of security. That's a principal concern. But also we're feeling, you know, less freedoms and opportunities for different points of view in terms of civil society, opposition, and such. So that is continuing to be an area of concern for us.
And finally, Mr. Reader, this award that I think it's obviously unanimous in the committee that we're appreciative of, that the embassy gives out for human rights. What has the response been from the government of Venezuela in this regard? I mean, it's very open. In fact, you know, after the person wins the award, they actually are toured. Has there been a negative response towards our government? Do they accept that? Is there some kind of contrition and some mending of their ways?
Well, sir, I would say that the government probably doesn't appreciate the award, but because of its profile and because of the way in which it's presented by us as an opportunity to support civil society, and because it does bring together a lot of groups in the country, I think they probably respect the award and choose not to attack it publicly, nor the recipients, because of the profile and the fact that, you know, the government of Canada is behind it. So in that sense, it is effective, but I can't imagine they enjoy a country coming in and recognizing human rights defenders, but they have placed themselves in the position which has led us to take a decision to advance this award, which again, I don't know whether it's unique to Venezuela or not outside of our region, but certainly in the case of Venezuela, it does have an impact, which they recognize, but I don't think they appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reader. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you to all committee members. Mr. Reader, we're very grateful to you for coming. Monsieur Jacob. Oh, my. Okay. Monsieur Jacob, vous avez la parole.
Mr. Jacob, the floor is yours. Thank you. Sorry about that. No worries. According to the United Nations, Venezuela's growth rate exceeds Argentina's, which is 2%, Brazil's, which is 1.5%, and Mexico's, which is 4%. The household consumption has been the driver for growth. This was made possible by the labour market, public investment, and an increase in credit. Could you please comment on the positive aspects of the economic program of the President Gutierrez? As I said earlier in English, it is clear that in some sectors and in some indices, there has been an increase in the living standards of the people with the most modest incomes in the country. This is recognized through the figures on the gap between the rich and the poor. This has been closed slightly. Also in terms of the poverty level, which is less than earlier. There are a number of programs that have been put in place. There's also more available housing for the poorest people under government programs. There have been a number of advances in certain sectors, that's for sure, but there is still work to be done elsewhere. It would be surprising with the government's revenue if they hadn't actually made progress. So we were expecting that on the part of the Venezuelan government. But there is a lot of work to be done still, and several sectors, including security, are left lacking. The government hasn't done what it needs to do. There are very high levels of insecurity, as are there very high levels of crime in Venezuela. Well, in fact, as far as crime is concerned, Mr. Hugo Pardo was the initial recipient of the Human Rights Award by the Government of Canada. This lawyer manages the prisons group, which is trying to improve the living conditions in prisons and provide rights for detainees. In its report, the subcommittee made the following realization that Mr. Fontes and his family were intimidated and received death threats after 2 huge riots in the prisons led to 22 deaths. The government was accused of working with political opponents in order to create chaos in the prisons and to destabilize the government. Could you please give us an understanding of that particular situation? Well, I can't say too much about that. However, it's not surprising that in the current context in Venezuela, the government wants to blame non-government groups. That is their objective, to discredit to civil society, and that is one way of doing this. Mr. Fontes is there to assist in the modernization of prisons in order to provide more space and improve living conditions for people, for inmates, and we know that the situation in the particular prison is very difficult. So the fact that he was targeted by the government and criticized baselessly. Well, as far as human rights are concerned, this is my third and final question. We get the sense that in Venezuela there is harassment and intimidation of some human rights defenders. In your opinion, what steps could Canada take to promote in Venezuela a climate of more tolerance and dialogue with defenders of human rights defenders? Well, with our embassy, we have gone to great lengths to unite people. This is a very polarized country, Venezuela, between those who are in the favor of the Chavez government and the opposition. There's a very hard line between the two groups. They're polarized. We know in the Venezuelan Congress, it's very difficult to get people to sit down at a table and discuss things without politicizing their respective positions. It's very difficult to build bridges of dialogue between various political parties. It's a job that the embassy is undertaking. We're trying to reduce some of the tension between the various groups and also support civil society in its efforts to not be isolated with respect to the government. And the message that we're trying to send out to the government is to be willing to accept the commentary and criticism of groups that are not politicized groups. The government, in fact, is affiliated with certain political parties, which isn't the case for us. But this is seen as a political gesture when there are groups of civil society engaging in this. So we need to be they need to be open-minded and accept that kind of commentary. It's part of democracy. Thank you very much, Mr. Reader. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies again, Mr. Jacob. Thank you for your patience.
Mr. Reader, we're going to try this again. Thank you for coming here and being a witness and providing us with information that was very helpful to all of us. We are grateful that you were able to come. All right. Colleagues, what I'm going to do is just give Mr. Reader a moment to collect his stuff. We're going to go in camera to deal with a small amount of future business, and then we'll adjourn for the day. So let's just suspend for a moment.